Hello, and welcome to the 38th edition of the Adoption and Fostering podcast with me, Scott Casson-Rennie, and him,
Al Coates.
MBE. Couldn't resist, sorry.
That's why I'm laughing.
So, before we started recording, Al got a fit of the giggles, and I'm still unsure as to why. I wish I'd actually introduced it before he got the giggles, but we had to record this a couple of times because he's just got a fit of the giggles, and he said he'd tell me all about it, and the MBE comment has brought it on again. So would you like to share, or would you like to mop up the pile of wee from laughing?
I had a really interesting dream. And I know people's dreams are the most boring things in the world, but I'll tell you anyway, because I'm not that bothered. I had this really odd dream because I got my invitations for the MBE. They came through in the post, and they've said that they're willing to take my children.
Oh my God! Can I get me an MBE as well, please?
I don't think they meant like that. I think meant more just for the day.
So they take care of them while you're being.
I have no idea. I think
whatever.
Yeah, not all of them, just the ones I've invited. Anyway, so last night I was thinking that then. Last night I had this really odd dream that involved the Queen. And in the dream, I got an invitation to come round and help her decorate.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and with an old friend of mine. Yeah. And when we got there, the Queen was sat, and she said, "Oh, do you fancy a drink?" And I went, "Oh, go on then." And she said, "Do you want a margarita?"
Oh my God!
And she gave me a blue margarita, and our margarita's blue. I don't know. Can you get?
I don't know.
No, I don't know.
No, that's Blue Lagoon, isn't it? I think.
All right,
this is the cocktail that's.
Well,
she
said I took her on her word. She said it was a blue margarita.
Well, you would. It's Queen.
It's the Queen. And we drank them, and then my friend got hysterically drunk. And I woke up in a cold. My friend was hysterically drunk, but inappropriately drunk in the Queen's house, and it was just really odd. But then today I was sat at work, and I was thinking about this, and I think, do you know what? I think she spiked the drink.
Oh, I don't know what part of that story is the weirdest or the funniest.
I was thinking about going. She must have spiked the drink.
It must have been very real-like.
It was very good. I'm not even sure that it was much funnier at the time, like most dreams. Anyway,
well, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. Interestingly, because I want to analyse that dream, because I think that just proves you've got a little bit of anxiety about going to her house to get your badge.
The anxiety might be about taking my children to see the Queen.
Could well be.
Visions of my children chinning a Scots Guard.
Although, is the Queen actually going to be there?
I don't know. I don't get told these things.
Do you not get told who's going to do the thing?
We just tip up.
Just rock up, see who's there.
Yeah,
and
rock
if
up.
It's Wills, it's Wills. If it's Ed, it's Ed. If it's
Ed.
Madge, it's a Madge.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to talk in such flippant tones.
Well, you know what I mean, though.
No, I would never.
Sorry. The Duke of Cambridge, who I've met, as you know, and the Duchess of Cambridge.
You should never drop names. Mick Jagger told me that.
Yeah, I know. I heard he told you that. I saw that on Twitter the other week when you were dropping names. Well, it's an interesting dream. I'll be interested to hear more about those kinds of dreams, because I think you've got more of those to come, I'm afraid.
Well, yeah. Well, welcome to the Adoption and Fostering podcast. And if that was a really terrible introduction, and I'm really sorry for that. But
we had to get rid of the giggles. We had to get rid of your giggles.
I've got tear stains on my face.
Yeah.
So
we've got a really interesting interview for everybody to listen to tonight.
Yes, and I have to state from the very outset that when Bridget found out you weren't going to be part of the interview, she was very disappointed.
Oh, why?
And she said, "Oh,
I thought she'd be pleased."
Well, she was. She hid it very well. She was very disappointed and said so. Yeah, she said, "Oh, that's." And she said, in the end, after we turned it off, she said, "Do you think we could maybe speak to Scott next time if we do it again?" I went, "Definitely."
Oh, I feel bad. Well, I felt bad anyway, because obviously I've been up to my eyeballs in work, and I just couldn't.
Oh, you're
could not.
Very brave.
Yeah. Oh, I'm disappointed now. I'm even more disappointed now.
Yes, she was very, very keen that she spoke to you.
Oh, thank you, Bridget, if you're listening, which you won't be because you've done the recording, so you don't need to listen to this rubbish, do you?
And
just fast forward to you a bit. like I do.
Yeah.
When I just fast forward.
Just
Anyway,
cut to the chase.
yeah. So anyway, what have you been up to, Al? Come on.
I've been really busy. I've had Ofsted. I've been Ofsteded,
Yes.
which was rather exciting.
Is that for your house or for your work?
For my work. Stupid question. No, it was for my work, and that was very interesting. Quite an inspiring experience, and just absolutely run ragged busy. So I'm really looking forward, because it's Easter, isn't it? It's Good Friday tomorrow.
Yeah, it is.
Very
So
excited.
this is our Easter treat to everybody, isn't it? We've not got our standard Christmas fare, but we've got our Easter eggs out.
Yeah, chocolate bunnies.
Bunnies are hopping everywhere around us.
Very good.
Yeah, and spring has sprung. Thank the Lord, can I just say?
Oh, heavens, yes. I love Easter. Easter's my favourite public holiday.
I think it's mine as well, because I think actually well, I don't know about anybody else's experience, but my experience is that the kids are actually quite calm around Easter. Yeah. It's one of those holidays that actually doesn't really affect them that much, so you do get that little bit of downtime. Yeah,
and as a parent, you don't have to spend weeks and weeks trying to rustle up presents. You just have to
buy an egg,
couple of quid, cheap egg, happy.
Exactly.
Boom.
Yeah.
4 days off work.
The more E numbers, the better. That's what I say.
There'll be fizzing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's all very good.
Yeah.
So I know you didn't hear. I don't want to kind of preempt the interview, but what did you think of Bridget's interview?
I was very impressed, and she there was a couple of things she just said, and I was listening to it in the car. I was on my way back from Brighton. I'd had a reasonably nice morning at work, but a reasonably bad morning in terms of what had gone on at home, and it just lifted me so much in terms of her. No, it really did. I'm not joking. I could just I could have just listened to it all day. I really could have done, because she knows. I mean, I always say this about the guests we have on, and I think that's massive. Part of what we do is that they all know their onions. We wouldn't get anybody on who didn't know what they were talking about, and Bridget just knows.
Present company accepted.
Well, yeah, of course, because we have no clue what we're talking about.
Literally.
But in terms of the adoption days, activity days are called, aren't they?
Yeah.
Is that what they're called? Yeah. I always had a really kind of weird misunderstanding of what the impact of them could be, and I never really agreed with them. And it's interesting, because since doing the work that I've been doing over the last couple of years, and listening, not just listening to Bridget, but other things as well, but definitely listening to Bridget, it just seems, we have moved in terms of that kind of introductory experience to our potential children, and
we didn't talk about that much.
No, I know, but. No, you didn't, and I was disappointed at that. That's maybe what we could talk about next time, actually.
Because there was so much to get to, and I just thought actually to shoehorn another subject in it didn't feel like it fitted, and because there was such rich pickings in what she was saying.
There was. I just massive,
I'm not gonna.
Massive, and do you know what? It's just one of those interviews that you think, yes, I am so pleased that she's talk to you about this, because actually it's just so useful for everybody. And there was one comment she made, and that was that really kind of inspired me, and I'll try not to give too much away, but it was the piece about adopted people, adopted children, adopted people generally. Obviously, that we all know that they try and retain some form of control over something, and whether that's secrets or lying or whatever, and it was her kind of strategy for dealing with that. It just made me go, oh yes, that's exactly how we need to approach this, because that is my biggest issue with all three of my children, is that control element. Not because I want to control it, it's just I want them to just let that bit go, because actually it has a massive impact on the way the family dynamics work every day.
I mean, there was such rich pickings. Everything she said, I kind of, and after we'd finished, I kind of tootled through to see Paula, and I just said, my head is blown. There's things that she said that really hung over me, and I don't want to I don't want to overblow the interview, and build up people's expectations. But it just, for me, there was some stuff that I felt really personally touched me, and I kind of thought, ooh. That's really made me think about my practice as a social worker, about me as a dad, about me as a parent, same thing. But you know what I mean. So that I think it's a really positive interview,
Yeah.
and really, really encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to hear
Yeah.
more from people like Bridget,
Definitely.
who's
Definitely.
which kind of links nicely to other stuff that we're hoping to do. I am aware that we've got some other interviews coming up after Easter. We're going to kind of be speaking to Beth Neal, aren't we?
Aye. Now there's an interesting one.
Aye.
Professor Beth Neal.
The good Professor Beth Neal.
Yes, a good professor.
And we're
I
also...
wonder if we'll be allowed to call her that when she's on, because she's got a sense of humour.
Clearly she has a sense of humour. She'll
have to let us know. She will listen to this, of course, because all good educated people listen to this podcast.
Yes, and which reminds me, you just before we came on, you said you would announce the 1,000th follower on Twitter.
Yes.
So who is it, Scott? Drum roll.
That was interesting. So for those that don't watch Twitter or didn't see Twitter, we just before we came to record, we had 999 followers on Twitter. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Because it is amazing, actually. The fact that 1,000 people on Twitter follow us, I just don't understand that. And I'm sure you're the same with your 6,000 odd personal followers, and I'm the same with my 5,004 followers. You think, why do they follow us? Anyway, we have...
Well, most of mine are young people who are wanting to ply me with their wares. You get you get strange followers all the time, don't you?
Yeah, you do, and you block them.
Yeah, they want to, and they're trying to hook me into their world. So.
Okay. Yeah, I've got over 1,000 people blocked on my account for various different reasons.
Really, you've got 1,000 people blocked on your account?
Yeah, I think it's mainly because of my Twitter name. That's a story for another day, I think.
Awkward silence.
Yes. Anyway.
Yeah.
I don't have it's not that I've got a dodgy name on Twitter. It's just that you can imagine
I don't want to imagine.
There's males that, anyway, so drum roll, please.
That took a turn, didn't it?
Since we've come on recording, we have a 1,000th follower, and I believe that it's Erica's husband on Twitter.
Partner.
Because she told it.
Partner.
Partner. Sorry. I apologise, Erica.
Never presume.
Erica's getting more of a mention than her partner.
Maybe she's become increasingly fond of him.
Yeah,
she's just try before you buy.
Yeah. So Marky Field 5697, you are our 1,000th follower. So welcome, thank you. You have gotten us into 4 figures. You've kicked off another few followers since then as well. So welcome, and thank you for following us. All 1,002 of you now, actually.
But an honourable mention needs to go to Stuart Guest, friend of the show. Did you see what he did?
Yes, I did see what he did. And to be fair, I've done that in the past, but it doesn't work because if you do it within a certain amount of time, it doesn't log as a new follow.
But I think does it? Well, he tried, and you got God loves a trier.
Failed.
But then there he did fail. Stuart, you failed. And we're not going to use his teaching models. We're going to say, you're a failure, Stuart.
Shame him.
Shame. You've let yourself down. You've let Twitter down. And most of all, you've let Scott down.
Yeah, exactly. And I had so much faith. I gave him this opportunity and he's just failed us.
And on the thought cloud of shame on the wall in our office, you're the dark clouds and lightning is coming.
You're at the bottom of the returning guest list now. No, you're not really, Stuart. Honestly.
No, honestly, Stuart. But also, I think it's worth mentioning the other person, Mummy Tiger, who tried to be number 1,000.
Yes, she did.
Yeah,
that's her. Yeah. Welcome, Mummy Tiger.
Yeah, but you snooze, you lose.
Welcome, but
the question has to be asked is, why were you not the first follower? Why were you looking? Hold now. And someone
and Chrissy J as well, a journalist. Oh, okay.
What do you mean? What's that for? Chrissy J, and her profile picture is of her with a giant gnome.
Oh, so it is. Is it a gnome? Yeah, it is.
This might be the dullest podcast intro that we've ever done.
It could well be, but you know what? I'm just acknowledging some of our followers, because you see adoption. So we're relevant. Although I'm very disappointed, and after adoption, they've only just started following us.
Really? Shame on them. Tut tut.
I'll have words with their CEO next time.
Yeah.
When I buy her a glass of wine because I think I'm all right. Anyway.
Shall we crack on?
So that's Twitter done, yes.
Yes.
Shall we crack on?
The podcast where two men look at Twitter. It's a corker, this episode, isn't it? Well,
yeah, it is.
So we're not going to do an outro, are we? Because I think it speaks for itself. We shall introduce Bridget now. So this is an interview with Bridget, and she's an adoptee. She's been a social worker for 38 years, and she is also the head of Safebase for after adoption, and an all-round good egg.
She is.
Excellent.
Enjoy and happy Easter.
Enjoy and very happy Easter. Too far.
Well, I could have went, meh.
Well, hello and welcome to the Adoption and Fostering Podcast.
Thank you.
Hello. Yes, I'm speaking to Bridget Betts, and I met you a few weeks ago. You invited me to come and speak to some people, and it was a fantastic day out. I really enjoyed myself in rainy Manchester. So, Bridget, could you explain a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why am I talking to you?
Well, it's a mystery why you're talking to me, Al. I can't answer that question.
You're just being modest.
I'm an adopted person. I'm also worked in social work for it's my 38th year working in social work.
No,
and
I can't believe that.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
I like to think so.
And I've worked across statutory and voluntary agencies and worked in the independent sector as well during the course of my career. And for 1990, I started working in adoption and fostering, and since then have worked across, again, the statutory and voluntary sector in both fostering and adoption over the years. And intertwined with that has been my own sort of personal journey, adoption journey, which at times, has really, I would say, enhanced what I've been doing. And other times I've had to take a step back and do something different, because it's been too much dealing with things on a professional level and on a personal level. And I feel really strongly, everybody has their own unique story. Adoption is a lived experience. It's a unique one. And I've had to be very, very conscious or aware is the better word, I think, of not putting my experience on other people. Because I think the important thing really is that we listen to each other's experiences and learn from them.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, there's a whole host of things, even in just that little introduction, that are really interesting and that I have a lot of questions. Because when I met you, you said, oh, did you know I was an adoptee? And I said, oh, no, I wasn't aware of that. And even in just the brief conversation we had, you were really open and honest. And I came away thinking, as a professional social worker, that's around these issues on a really, you're kind of in the midst of the industry. Can I call it an industry? That must be, how do you separate personal from professional? And has it ever been have you ever found yourself in awkward situations?
I've never found myself in an awkward situation. I guess the way I describe it is sometimes it's a real blessing. I think particularly, working with and alongside children who, are not living with their birth family for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And I think at times that gives me a real insight into a tiny little bit of what they might be feeling, or how huge a thing adoption is for them, and all the transitions that they have to make, and the loss that's part of that. That is a signature tune of adoption, whatever your experience, whether you're an adopter, an adoptee, a birth parent, that's part of the signature tune. And I think sometimes just having that insight and having some understanding that that is a chronic grief. I think that was a phrase actually you used, Al, when you came and spoke to us after adoption, and I totally agree with that. It's not something, it's a lived grief. It's something that you never come to terms with. So in some ways it's a blessing in terms of that insight, and at times that's been really, really helpful, both with my work with children and adopters, to speak from personal experience. But at other times it's been a curse, because, you know, being aware that sometimes some children's stories and just cross your story in a way that's actually quite painful. And, you know, it's no good in social work. I always say that when I stop feeling stuff, I'll stop being a social worker, because there's no point. And so you have to feel stuff. But that's sometimes, I think, when you've got a personal experience, that vulnerability, can make you more vulnerable. But that vulnerability at the same time can be a strength.
Yeah.
But it's how you manage that. And I have a very supportive family, and, you know, over the years, I've met some incredibly supportive and have incredibly supportive colleagues, and, you know, some of the children and adoptive families I've worked with over the years have just been incredibly supportive as well. So I think you mentioned at the beginning, I've always been quite open, and I think, you know, openness is important in adoption, being able to talk about the positive stuff, and I'm a great believer in adoption, but also to be able to talk about the stuff that's really quite difficult. And I've you know.
Yeah, I was going to ask, sorry to butt in, but I was going to ask, across your experience, sort of from you growing up and you're an adoptee, and then comparing it to the openness that there is now, I mean, would you be willing to share some of your story?
Yeah. I mean, I was adopted in the 50s. My mum, you know, my story was a complete mystery to me, because, you know, when eventually I got hold of some of the records, that, you know, my mum and dad had a clean house, they were a professional couple, they wanted children, so that was it.
That was dire assessment.
Yes, when you look at it, but I think they were ahead of their time in the 50s, because I always knew that I was adopted. I never, you know, grew up. It was part of my story, although when I was little, I hadn't got a clue what it meant, because I used to go around saying I was doctored.
Right.
Which I didn't know what being adopted meant. And it took a while for the penny to drop, you know, as I sort of got older and began to understand the complexities of how families work and how families come together, and that I had a lovely narrative that went with it about being chosen and all of that. But I got to the point, I can remember probably as I got to secondary school thinking, hang on a minute, in order to be chosen here, I had to be rejected somewhere else. And I think that then you spend the rest of your life as an adoptee, I think, holding those things in tension, that, you know, yes, my adoptive parents chose me, but although, you know, in the 50s, how, you know, a birth mothers relinquished, in inverted commas, their babies. Actually, I don't think my mother had a choice, reading between the lines, now knowing something of her story. But I never felt relinquished. And that word's really heavily laden if you begin to unpick it. But I always, my inner experience, even though being chosen, said I was chosen, was one of feeling rejected, because, and particularly then going on to be a parent, that then adds another layer about thinking about what it means to actually place your child for adoption. I mean, I don't like the phrase being given up for adoption, because to me it implies in some way that you're worthless. And that's one of the key themes, I think, that runs, you know, like rock for a lot of adopted children, is that feeling of not being good enough, of not measuring up in some way, of being worthless. And I didn't know anything about my past. I grew up fantasizing that, my birth mother had had me against the odds and my birth father had run off into the night. And I remember trying to ask my mum about it, my adoptive mum, and it took me till I was 18 to ask that question. And do you know where I asked that? It was in the car.
All right.
Sitting alongside.
Some things never change.
Well, and I can remember asking the question and thinking, what will that mean for me? And yes, I was an illegitimate baby. My mum had gone abroad for a year. She was a teacher. She'd gone to a naval school to teach in Malta, met my birth father, who was married with 2 children, ended up going on a blind date with a mate who was also there teaching with her. It was the first time my mother had had sex, and hey, presto, she falls pregnant with me. And, what was really interesting from my records was that my birth father, unusually for the 50s, actually offered to pay maintenance on a voluntary level. And
Right.
my records indicated that he'd left a letter for me to have when I was 21, where he wanted to explain why he hadn't, been involved in my life, and that he was married, and he had given consideration to bringing me up in his own family. But what's interesting later on, when eventually I discovered that he died at 51 when I was age 16, so I never got to say hello and I never got to say goodbye to him. But I discovered that he had written a letter wanting to explain everything to me. But I then discovered that his wife didn't know anything about me. Absolutely nothing. So he'd obviously not discussed it with her. So when a friend of mine acted as intermediary, who's a very experienced adoption professional, and got in touch with his wife, she was totally shocked, and it sent her into she just shut down and didn't come out the house again.
Because she discovered her husband had an affair.
And he said he was in the Navy, and it was like, how many more children will come knocking on my door?
The basis of their relationship and their life was
and
destroyed.
He had died. She was reflecting. He wasn't there to ask, because he died several years before.
So there was no resolution for her. She couldn't.
No resolution for her. So it shattered her life, and so I had to sort of. I don't feel responsible for that, but it's difficult walking. You're treading on eggshells because you're walking back into people's lives. And then with my birth mother, that's been a really complicated journey.
So can I just pedal back a little bit? So 18, you found out a bit more detail. Was it then that you started to go searching?
No, because I knew. I grew up with 2 brothers who are younger than me, who are both adopted from different families. Right. So we grew up as siblings with no bloodline, but a storyline. Yeah. And, Nigel sort of looks a bit like Noel Gallagher. Richard's got 6 foot with something with ginger hair. He's not got a lot of it left now. And people used to sort of say to the 3 of us, don't you look alike? And Richard would go red, and you could see under his breath, what the are you? People had to make us look alike because we were so not alike. Yeah. And it's only now, later in life, I think that we're beginning to develop a relationship, because I was slightly older than them. I was a mystery to them, and they were a mystery to me, and it was like we had no connection whatsoever. And having since met maternal birth siblings, that's really weird, because I have a bloodline to them, an instant physical connection, which is just really weird, but I have no storyline with them. And from being the eldest of 3, I'm now, because I've got paternal birth siblings, I'm now the 8th out of 10.
So it's
in terms of my siblings.
Upside down
mind-blowing.
Turn around. Crikey. I can't begin to imagine.
And it's just been a very weird sort of journey, really. And, both my brothers have traced as well. And what's really interesting, this whole issue, Al, about nature versus nurture, which is something that fascinates me. And, Robbie Gilligan, I remember hearing him talk years ago, saying, you can take the child out the family, but you can't take the family out the child. And, I forgot what I was saying there actually, but it's just like I've been part of that family, my birth family, all along, even though they've been a ghost family. And the whole nature versus nurture stuff. I mean, when my son, who's now 35, was 11, he said, I want to go to a university by the sea. I'm going to study in the Navy. I want to go in the Navy and I'm going to study geography. I didn't know it at the time, but my birth father went to Aberystwyth University. He studied geography and he was in the Royal Navy. And now my son is a lieutenant commander in the Royal Navy.
That's, yeah.
And you put a photograph of him next to my birth father in his naval uniform, and you'd think they were father and son. But I didn't even know that when Pete was making those choices. And like my brother, my youngest brother, has always been a keen writer. And it's only since he's retired he started writing. He traced his birth family, and both of his birth parents were journalists. And my other brother is a singer, songwriter, and his sons are into acting. His birth mother's quite a famous, both of his birth parents are quite famous actors. So when you look at that, you just think, but you can't take the child.
But that's quite scary.
Out the child, it is quite scary.
I'm thinking of your generation of adopters, which is a huge cohort of, we talked about relinquished and, what element of choice was there. But then we look at the current cohort of adoptees and adoptive situations, and they're very different. The reason why children are adopted, there's very few relinquished or, they're all legislated and, they're non-consensual, and there's complex family backgrounds that have kind of precipitated those events. So that's your stories. It's a great story, and it's remarkable, and it makes you think. But then you look at some people who've got children who've come from really challenging backgrounds. That's quite sobering, isn't it? It's I'm not sure what to make of it.
And I think, the lived experience for many of children today who are joining adoptive parents is so very different, and trauma has been sadly part of their lived experience from the beginning of their lives, which has distorted their view of the world, of relationships, that the world is not a benign place. I don't think I ever felt that growing up. I didn't feel anchored or have a sense of belonging, but I never felt that the world wasn't a benign and friendly place. And I always felt that, I always knew that my mum and dad wanted the best for me. I never had an issue with their intentions towards me. But still, for me, I think the book reading Nancy Verrier's book in 1993 when it came out, The Primal Wound, that was the first time I felt anybody had connected with my adoption experience. It was like Nancy had written that and spoken to me, because very subtly all through my childhood, my experience of loss and my inner experience was denied. Well, you should be, you're so lucky you're adopted. You're so lucky this. Yeah. And, you were only 10 days old when you were adopted, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But actually, yes, it does, because that trauma right at the beginning of your life has a profound effect. And I would say that's cast a very long shadow over my life in terms of making sense of relationships and being grown up in them and all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah.
That's been hard work. I understand that better now, but, in my 20s and 30s, I don't think I did at all.
I mean, they're universal themes, aren't they? Because often I'm on Twitter and I'll see people from different countries who've got their process of adoption is very different, but those themes are universal: sense of belonging or a lack of belonging, sense of trust of people, that influences relationships and their expectation of how people will respond to them. It's just woven into people's DNA, isn't it? regardless of the process.
Well, it is. And, my expectation is like my default setting. I think under stress, we all go back to our factory settings, and our kids do as well.
Yeah.
And we do as adults when we're under stress. I mean, that's part of the complexity of being a parent as well, isn't it? That we all go back to our default setting. And my default setting is one of expecting to be abandoned and rejected. And I actually recognise that far more now. And I know I can talk to myself when I think that that's happening, or, because that is just my expectation.
Yeah.
And I now know I don't fight that anymore or get upset about it, because that's just the way it is. That's the way my inner landscape, that's what it's like. And I've got better at managing it, and I've got better at accepting love, as it's offered. I'm much, much better at that now. Whereas I think, I often read stuff about, and I really get this, about children wanting to keep part of themselves back, or you keep part of yourself secret because it's the only bit you have control over. And I completely understand that you keep that little bit of yourself locked away, and that to be really vulnerable and share that takes an awful lot of trust, actually,
But I suppose you're operating out of a level of self-awareness, and you're in a profession.
Oh, absolutely.
A profession that's, there's an expectation as a social worker that you have a level of self-awareness, because that's key to you working with individuals, isn't it? But there's many that don't know that. They just are reacting and responding to stimuli.
And I think I'm often disappointed that, some colleagues and some social workers, I ran my own training and consultancy for 16, 17 years, and used to do a lot of training and stuff around loss, life story work. I've done quite a lot on life story work, and just working with individuals who just are not able to step into the shoes of a child's experience. Because it's too painful, I think, and to think about how they manage that for children on their caseload, and the amount of loss that our children who are in public care, and we are corporate parents to them. I'm just sort of, very passionate about that we are corporate parents to these children, that actually they deserve the best, and they deserve our understanding, but the reality is many social workers don't have the time to do that. They've got so many other demands. And I remember talking to a group of social workers not so long ago who said, the average time I can spend with a child is 15 minutes when I do a visit. And you think, well, how do you actually begin to know your children? It's impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm quite young in the profession, but I made a decision when I was training that I don't think I could work in statutory because of that. I just felt it's not. I don't want to be a sort of a factory social worker because it seems not worthwhile, and perhaps because of my age, I just thought, well, I'm not going to do it. So, and I've found myself in this place where I do have time to practice. You've literally, as you're talking, I'm thinking, we should talk about this, we should talk about that, because you're covering so many bases with your own personal experience and professional experience. I wanted to ask, why did you go into social work? I know there's the temptation to believe, or that people say often the people who need the most social work are social workers.
Absolutely.
But I'm not going to say that
well,
to you.
It was an accident, really, because I wanted to be an architect, and I'm quite a keen artist, and I enjoy photography and all sorts of stuff, and I wanted to be an architect, but my physics and maths were not good enough for that at the time. And girls of my generation didn't do that sort of thing either. So when it came to making a choice about university, and I could have gone to Oxbridge, but I didn't want to, for me, what was most important were, could I cycle? Because I was a very keen cyclist. And 2, I was a keen climber and walker. So it needed to be near mountains. So I decided to go to Lancaster University, not very academic. And I decided that when I went, I didn't want to do any of the subjects I'd done at A level because I quite enjoyed geography and history and stuff, and I didn't want to spoil it by doing a degree. So I sort of stuck a pin in what Lancaster had to offer and chose social administration. Well, after 3 seconds of being in the first lecture...
What social administration?
Don't ask me, because after 3 seconds of being in the first lecture, I thought, this is a big mistake, Bridget. This is so boring. The good thing about Lancaster was it was a modular. You took 3 subjects equally in your first year, and you could swap your degree and whatever. You could swap it round. I'd already made my mind up, after 3 seconds into the first lecture, I was not into social administration. So in the first year I was there, they were starting a social work degree and were desperate. So they were coming round to people who were doing social administration and psychology and other things, saying, do you fancy doing social work training? You come out with a degree and a social work qualification. I thought, well, I've got nothing better to do. I might as well just sign up to do the social work degree. So I did. And there I go. And you know what? Not a single thing that I learnt on that degree was of any use to me whatsoever. And it was very much based on Rogerian sort of therapy, and
I don't even know what that is.
Well, it was like it was the sort of thing where the lecturers would walk in and they'd say things like, Bridget, you're looking really angry the way you're sitting. And I'm thinking, well, I'm feeling really angry now, but I was okay 2 minutes ago. And we used to have what were called encounter groups all the time. And we'd go away to like farmhouses halfway up Ingleborough and like talk about our feelings. And I remember just having enough of this and walking out at 2:00 in the morning down the side of Ingleborough and spending the night in a phone box in Clapham, just waiting for a mate to come and pick me up.
Wow.
Because
my degree wasn't anything like that.
Oh, honestly, this, social work in the mid-70s, my goodness.
A hotbed.
And it was a hotbed, and it's like, if it feels good, it is good. If it feels bad, don't bother. It was the whole basis of everything we did.
Wow.
Not what I did, but, So I came out with this sort of certificate that said I was a social worker, but... I was an infant social worker for a very long time because I had a lot to learn. I remember my first job was in inner city Birmingham, just as the riots happened. And our office was firebombed and everything else. And it was sort of welcome to Handsworth, really. And the first door I knocked on, this bloke came with his beer belly and everything sticking out in his fag, and like I had to do this supervision order on his son, and he just slammed the door in my face. So I'm there with this big book of how to do social work under bar. I'm thinking, what do I do now?
What next?
I knock again, and he said, you can only come in if you have something out the lounge that's knocked off, he said.
Oh, well, every cloud has a silver lining.
Thinking, I actually know nothing about life and I know nothing about social work, but I have just been so fortunate in terms of the journey that I've had professionally, and the people that I've met along the way have just been fantastic and shaped, my professional career. And I've been fortunate to do what I've wanted all throughout my career, really, and make the choices.
And not everyone has that opportunity, do they? That's fantastic. So in 1990, you said you went into adoption, which I guess is just after the Children Act. What was the landscape of adoption then?
That was so interesting, because I remember at the time I was working in a fostering team, and we were sitting there working out how we would explain to foster carers they could no longer smack their children. Because
awkward conversation.
But it was acceptable.
Wow.
Everything's so shaped by the Children Act. In fact, that's a really good thing. But I remember we were thinking, how are we going to put this across that actually we can no longer use physical punishment and blah, 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 all the definition in the Children Act. And we're going to have to really look at behaviour management and stuff like that. and look at our whole recruitment and assessment, and that they've really got to sign up to not using any physical chastisement at all, blah blah blah, and how we're going to keep people on our books. And
crikey,
that was really fascinating when you think. And when I was a social worker, when I was training, we did quite a bit about physical abuse and stuff, but sexual abuse was never mentioned on my training course because it just wasn't in anybody's. Well, it's always happened, but it wasn't on the radar. And I look back now, I mean, for me, it was the launch of Childline, I think in 1985, 1986, that brought it home to me. And when I was working in Birmingham and in and around Leicestershire as well, I was going into the children's homes where Frank Beck was in charge, and I think back now and think, goodness me, some of those kids were being abused under my nose and I hadn't got a clue.
Blimey.
And you just think how much the landscape and awareness, has changed. And particularly, in the last 10, 15 years, the advances in neuroscience and our understanding of the impact of trauma, 90% of what we know we've learned in the last 15 years. It's amazing. That's just changed the whole way we think about our support for children and their families. And again, you look back and think, well, that was always there, but we didn't recognise it. And if you could go back and rewind, I sometimes think about some of the families early on and think, well, I could have done a much better job if I'd known that then. But you have to work on what you know at the time.
Because there's always been this I mean, we're looking at 5,000, give or take, adoptions a year at the moment, but there's always been those 5,000 children have always existed. Those are the most vulnerable, the most impacted by trauma, who've seen the worst of society, perhaps. And so even in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, there was always those children. And they were just not dismissed, but perhaps just not seen or handled very, very differently.
But I think, they were, some of them were locked up. Some of them, were in remand homes and borstalls and homes with what were they called, those homes where you had education as well? I can't remember the name because I used to go and visit them, and their behaviours were like off the wall, but they were because of trauma. But we didn't have that understanding at all.
They were just framed very differently as children.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think we're much better informed now. I don't think there's any excuse now for not joining up the dots properly.
But we're still struggling out with culture. I mean, we're still fighting against different cultural understanding within different paradigms, within education, within, the police, within family, our own families.
Absolutely.
We're fighting against it. But it has moved. So it is positive, isn't it? It is positive. I'm telling myself it's positive.
Well, I think yes, I think it is positive, but it's moving, it's helping. We've got to bring professionals along, that I see that as part of my role, is trying to bring fellow professionals along in terms of their understanding and how they see the world and how they actually help adoptive parents and foster parents make sense of living alongside a traumatized child, how they make those connections. And I think that's it is for adopters and it is for professionals as well. That's quite a painful experience to go through.
Yeah.
And to realise, if you really want to connect with the child's experience, I'd rather not go there. I'd rather not know some of the stuff that's in my head sometimes, or the stuff that kids have told me. I wish it wasn't in there. And that's really difficult as a social work professional and for adopters as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because sometimes we are overloaded with living with our children because of their behaviour, but also sometimes actually empathy overload, that sense of actually what you have experienced is beyond what I can kind of cope with, really. It's just too much. So we've got to protect ourselves in the midst of all that, haven't we?
We have, and some of it, I mean, it just doesn't make sense, does it? How a human being can actually behave in that way to a small child, or damage them, make them so frightened of the world and relationships, and I don't know how human beings can do that to each other, and so it's something that's never made sense to me. I have all the theory about why it happens, but in terms of and helping children make sense of that, sometimes I just think, well, if I can't make sense of it, how on earth do I help a child to make sense of it? Because some of it is just inexplainable.
Yeah. Ooh.
But our children have to live with that, don't they?
Yeah.
That's their lived experience as well.
That's the lens through which they see the world, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I was going to move you. I was going to continue. I've got, as I say, I've got so many threads from what you've said. One is you talked briefly when we chatted last time I met you. You were talking about your perspective on adoption. And the changes in systems, and I don't want to draw you onto the rocks unnecessarily, but but if you want to come onto the rocks, that's fine. Because I think one voice that we don't seem to hear a lot is the voice of adoptees, but also of adoption social workers. We hear a lot of high level, ministerial level. We hear a lot of adopters, but actually, you're a social worker. You've done this for 28 years. You've been in adoption.
38, yeah.
But
28 years in adoption.
In adoption.
Yeah.
So actually, what do you think? Are things getting better? Are we on the right track?
I think, adoption as we have it in terms of the system and its historical context probably isn't fit for the 21st century and the group of children that actually need adoption the most. I think in terms of how we recruit adopters, how we assess them, how we introduce them to children, and how we place children with them, I think that's still very much got its roots in, relinquished babies. And that, for me, there's something about how we prepare adopters. We spend an awful lot of time assessing adopters. Most of adopters haven't been adopters before. Many haven't been parents before. Against, we're assessing their potential to be adoptive parents and parents, somebody else's child. We probably spend 80% of our time doing that, and then 20%, matching, and then expecting adopters to make a decision, one of the most important decisions about a relationship, and a relationship that's going to last longer than any probably marriage or partnership, on the basis of written information and a photograph. And, I just feel that's slightly bananas, that we should be putting a lot more time into actually matching this family for this child, and throwing, having the opportunity to meet the child, meet the foster carers, and have all the medical information, all the information that you need. I mean, I used to work for an organisation, an adoption agency that went on for 30 years before, sadly, it collapsed, called Parents for Children, which was a pioneering agency that placed the traditional, in inverted commas, hard to place children with adopters going back to the 70s, and they used to do child-specific assessments. They actually, really interesting, they started adoption picnics. It was Parents for Children who did that in the first place in the 70s, with children with a high level of medical need, or with multiple disabilities, met prospective adopters at picnics. Now, somebody from Parents for Children trundled over to the States and talked about this, and they took this up, and adoption parties started up there big time. But do you know what? Not many people know this, Al. It was our idea in the first place. Adoption party, and Parents for Children were doing it in the 70s.
Back in the day.
Back in the day. And I don't know why that got lost. I think we then started having things like Be My Parent was launched in 1980. I remember that. Where you got sent the inserts for the little blue folder on your desk every week and updated it with the children. And I remember the Daily Mail saying something like catalogue children and stuff like that. But we lost that. We lost some of that way of getting to know children before they actually, you walk in on that first day of introductions and meet their foster carer. And like you've stepped on the train, then it's very hard to get off, and we don't give people permission to say this isn't right. And chemistry is really important. So I don't know what the answer is really. That I just think you're making such a huge decision on such limited information sometimes. And I think some of the written stuff's so scary as well.
I mean, they remain, but adoption activity days remain really sort of, they're tabloid fodder, aren't they? In one sense, they're meeting children in parks, and do you like little Johnny, and what if little Johnny isn't picked, and what if the new mum and dad don't want him, and they want, they run past him to the nicer Johnny that's next to it. I mean, I
think we've addressed all of that, Al. I mean, when we started out, that was where it was, but now the proof is in the pudding. So many kids have found families who wouldn't be in families today if adopters hadn't met them as children. And that's just the beginning. That all the stuff about sharing information comes after that. It's not like you take little Johnny home with you. And I was always adamant that children, if they were old enough, knew what they were coming to, which actually meant that workers had to do the work with them. And it actually meant for some workers they had to start doing life story work with them, because some children, the majority of older children, didn't know they were actually being advertised for adoption.
Oh, now there's a question. That's interesting, isn't it?
And talking to, older adopted teenagers who had quite an input into adoption activity days. We worked with a group from Quorum. They were fascinating because they had questions like, I don't know who decided what would go in my profile, who chose the photograph. I don't know why my parents chose me. And some of them didn't even know that they had been advertised in any publication at all. But that's the, but that's the easy way out, I think. I'm perhaps being a bit controversial here, because then if we don't find a family for a child, we don't have to tell them. But actually what we forget is I used to do quite a bit of, life story work with children, where you'd be looking through their files and you'd see the adverts for Be My Parent in there, and, nobody came forward to adopt them, and that's part of their narrative, and they're going, well, I never knew that. So then at 21 they're having to deal with that
rather than a sensitive conversation at the time.
Yes, and this is how it is. And there was some fantastic work done when I was doing the pilot for adoption activity days, and when it went on to become a national service, with some social workers who just did some incredible work with children about why they were in the position that they were in, that if we could find an adoptive family, this is what would happen. If not, for some of those children, actually talking to them, some of those older children, their narrative was, well, I actually know my social worker did absolutely everything they could do to find me a family. And I was involved in that. I wrote my profile for the adoption activity day. I came, I had some control. That's the other side of it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I was thinking there, my daughter, one of my daughters, she was told an hour before she met us that she was getting a new mum and dad. And I was 27. I didn't know any better. I was led by social workers and their wisdom, and there was a clear rationale why we did that. But with hindsight, it doesn't seem so clear now.
I mean, I think it was a really interesting project to be to be involved in. And the reason, I was approached and asked if I'd be interested in doing it, and I stuck my hand up because I like a challenge. And but I just feel passionately that we should, if we don't take risks for our children that are waiting, and if we don't take those safe risks for them, where are we going to be?
Yeah.
If we sit in our cozy safe spaces behind, we've always done it this way, so we'll continue to do it this way, which clearly for some children doesn't work, then we're not doing our best for these children. And we have to have, at some point, Al, somebody has to have difficult conversations with these youngsters about why they are where they are, and why they're not living with their birth family, and why we never found a family for them. We have to do that work.
That's really sobering stuff. Just you talking there, you start to think about what that means for some children, and actually who's gonna step up to that, because I'm not sure I would want to be having those conversations with children. And so you're talking about meaningful, difficult work. It kind of makes me think about, you're clearly passionate about it and willing to, and very comfortable taking on difficult tasks if it's a right task. Is there an element of us not listening to adoptees that's kind of historic? Because I still see that on Twitter and on social media and in narratives, the voice of the adoptee is very rarely listened to.
I think it's interesting, because I can revert in some meetings where you've got social workers sitting around and other quite powerful adults. Internally, I can still, although I'm sitting there as, in inverted commas, a professional social worker, I can then still feel like a child and that I don't have a voice in some of those, because I think it is very difficult. There's a lot of talk about listening to children all the way through, starting with the Children Act, taking into account wishes and feelings. But it's very painful doing that. If we really listen to children and what their experience is and what they want, it's painful.
Yeah.
And it's difficult and challenging. And
it's time consuming.
I think it's time consuming, and it actually sometimes puts you in a position where you have to examine yourself and where you're coming from and what you're doing and why you're doing it, and with all the other pressures that you have, that actually is too tall an order sometimes. And all the stuff that comes through, from the Children's Commissioner, from other stuff that's been done over the years, is yes, we need to listen to children, the voice of the child, but actually, no, we don't very often. And I think it's listening to adulthood. I was involved in a book that the title of which that's gone out of my head, that Bath put together. It's called Chosen, which was an anthology of adopted adults speaking about their experience, and that was launched at Goldsmiths University, and John Simmons from Bath, who is himself an adoptive parent, sort of did the launch for that. And I think 15 or 16 of us who contributed the book came to speak, and it was just gobsmacking, I think, listening to the individual stories of those adoptees, all very different but with very similar themes. And all the way through, although there's one of hope and redemption and all of that, still that chronic sadness and loss underneath, and often having your experience denied because it's too painful for the adults around you to acknowledge it.
Yeah. It's
and I feel, that's why I've been so passionate about life story work in the past for children, is that, as a social worker, I have to get my hands dirty, and I have to be willing to sit with children and young people in their confusion and pain. Sometimes there's no words. I can't make it right. It's their lived experience. I can't heal it. I can't sort it. But I can understand and I can sit with them in it. And I can sit alongside them. And sometimes that's all you can do. And sometimes, well, they're going to have to live with it for the rest of their lives and find a way of integrating that into who they are in a positive way.
Yeah, that's really sobering, isn't it? Because, all of us as adoptive parents, we'd like to which goes back to preparation, is, I remember distinctly thinking it'll be okay in the end. For us as a family, and the reality is that it's complicated. It's it is difficult, and the shadows cast long in my children's lives. They're young adults now, and there's still shadows.
And I think that blog you wrote recently about what was the phrase that your daughter made? Was it your daughter about memories? About you were talking about welcoming a new member of the family and baby into your family, and that set you thinking about your children's experience and all of that and what that might trigger for them, and about memories and not having memories.
Yeah.
And there's my birth family has been a ghost family. Well, it was for many years, but even though they had no shape or form, they were still very powerful. I still thought about them every day. Well, not every day, but they popped in and out of my consciousness at different times. But now they've got shape and form. My story is that, having traced my birth mother eventually, and I won't go into the ins and outs of that, but that she has consistently refused to see me. She's still alive. She doesn't live in this country. And I have 3 half-siblings on my maternal side who she lied to about me. And now I have a relationship with them, which is lovely. But I don't have a relationship with my birth mother, and she will never, ever, ever, I think, she's in her 80s now, change her mind about that. And she's still stuck in 1950s guilt.
That's really interesting. It's heartbreaking. I've got a friend who, she's a social worker, and she's really open and honest about her story. But she, as a teenager, got pregnant, and the reality is that she's never. She had to give her child up for adoption. She relinquished, but there was no sense of choice. There was no. She said there wasn't even a conversation. It was this is what's going to happen. It was she was on there was tram lines and it was set for her. But that, however many years on now, is still a wound that's almost irreparable for her. And she's very open and honest about that. But the damage is basic. I'm reluctant to say irreparable, but I think it is irreparable for her as well. Really complicated.
And absolutely. And again, that those sorts of wounds, again, for birth mothers, you have to. They end up having to find a way of living with that.
Yeah.
And, they're very marginalised in all of this, birth mothers and birth parents in the adoption process. And they are the party in all of this with the least support. Yeah. But that's a whole other sort of issue. But
yeah, I was fortunate when I did my degree. I worked with a charity that supported families whose children are in care, different routes, different versions of care, and it was probably one of the most profound experiences of my life. It just changed everything about how I understand who I was, where I fit into this so-called triangle, because it's not a triangle, is it? And it just really, it changed everything, and I think that informs every single blog I write, that there is another story to tell. There's lots of other stories. Have you ever done any work with adult adoptees? Is that something? Because there's very few support groups.
Yeah. I was very involved in the 90s in helping to set up Nottinghamshire's adoption support service, support after adoption, and we had quite a strong adult adoptee group there. We also had quite a strong birth mothers group. And, that's still, I think, an exemplary and exceptional adoption support service that Nottinghamshire have, that was sort of shaped by the input of, adoptees and birth mothers right at the beginning. So I don't think we had any birth fathers at that point involved. But, and yes, I have done, I've been on the receiving ends of birth records counselling to have my own records, but I have undertaken birth records counselling for adopted adults for a number of agencies over the years. Yes, and I've enjoyed that work, as I've been life story work. I think, you're in a position of huge power as, doing birth records counselling for adult adoptees or doing life story work with children, because you as the social worker can decide what information to share and what constitutes the story, and what to leave in and what to leave out. And
that's ethical questions there. Should you leave stuff out?
Well, let me just say that you read CPRs now, child permanence reports, and before that, what were they called? Form Es.
Yeah.
And I always had the sense reading those. They hadn't got everything in, and often my first thing that I used to do doing life story work for children was to go and look at their records. And I would always take an undertaking that I would touch every piece of paper in that file and read it, even if it was 15 files, because that's child life. And when you then start to pull that out, nobody's had the time to go back and read that, and you start pulling out information from a child's background that nobody's read before. It's there, but nobody's read it. And I remember doing some work for two little boys where, said they'd just had 2 moves in foster care since they come into care, which was quite enough for them because they were only sort of 18 months and 3 years old at the time. But what nobody had appreciated was that before they came into care, they'd had 22 moves in their birth family.
22?
22. And that was all in the record, but you had to read it to put it together.
But all that was seen was that kind of headline figure of 2 moves in care, which is what's measured, isn't it?
Yeah. But many children have had pre-care disruption and chaotic lives, and I was and these 2 little ones at 18 months and 3 years were just all over the place, and I think it really helped the foster carers and prospective adopters to understand why they were like they were and what they actually needed going forward. Because none of that would have gone forward into their adoptive home. That knowledge would have just been lost until they perhaps access their records 18, years down the line,
19,
or whenever
20.
they might never do that.
Yeah.
And they will have, on a sensory level, some memory of that disruption and everything, because, young children do remember and the body keeps the score. I was adopted at 10 days old as a baby, but my strongest, I don't have a visual memory, an autobiographical memory of this, like when you press the video player and you can see yourself, but in my senses, that actually feeling very lonely and bright and just bright lights. And I learned later on that I spent 10 days by myself in the hospital just lying looking at the lights. And another sort of colleague of mine who was adopted, his memory wasn't visual, it was auditory, and that was of the nurses walking up and down the lino floor with their crepe-soled shoes.
Wow.
As a baby, yeah.
As a newborn baby.
And that's at a sensory level, because that sort of feeling, of just being totally alone and bright lights, and when eventually piece the story together. I mean, my poor birth mum was just told to walk away. She never held me, and it was 10 days later my mum and dad came and picked me up from the hospital.
So 10 days, just
10 days. Just
isolation.
Think of 10 days. Nurses came and in those days, just like you fed the baby and whatever, that was fine. But when you think about your own children and what you put into a young child at that age, and being a granny now, and just seeing how much how much you're putting into a small baby, those first 10 days, what you miss out on. And just that sense of loneliness of being alone. And I am quite a self-contained person. And I think that goes right back to those very, very early moments.
Crikey. You've just, I feel like I could go on and on. I'm aware that we've talked for an hour.
Have we?
Yeah.
You should have shut me up, Al.
No, honestly, I feel like I've interrupted you so many times. No. You've been talking so much about so much interesting stuff. It's been amazing. And I think you've really, I think it's, I speak to lots of people, but actually you've given me so much to think about. And I think your experience is, you've been so generous with your experience, and your experience is quite...
thank you.
Quite, it's very moving to think how that's influenced then your career, and how you work with the families and continue to do so, because you continue to do that. What's next for Bridget Betts?
Well, at the moment, I'm working with After Adoption. I'm the national manager for the Safebase therapeutic parenting program, which, I think for some people, I think it's essential for all adopters now. I'm not particularly promoting Safebase, but in terms of understanding what it means to be not just an ordinary parent where life's dead easy, but a therapeutic parent, and you learn to sort of whisper Dan Hughes and all the other stuff, all of that stuff. And I think that's really, really important. And it's great to be able to think about some of that stuff. And I'm particularly interested at the moment looking at, how we support parents of teenagers, because I think that's a really crucial time. And that's where real life story work belongs for me, developmentally, that so many of our teenagers now are asking perhaps to meet birth parents before they're 18 or, so much complicated stuff comes up for them, because developmentally it's when you're starting to think about who you are. And I'm really thinking about that, how we can shape better support for teenage, for parents of teenagers. And I'm particularly interested in how we weave meaningful life story work for teenagers into that, because it's been so focused on younger children. Yeah. And I'm also interested in how we proactively support siblings in placement, whether they're birth siblings or, however groups of children come to live together. I'm not talking about just reducing conflict. I'm talking about how you really help to develop pro-social relationships and offer really meaningful support.
No, that's really encouraging, because I think that, to my mind, is kind of a new phenomenon that I'm sure all teenagers have had those questions, but it feels now that with the advent of social media and the connectivity of the world that we live in, that our children, our young adults, need to be equipped with the facts, so that they can make informed choices, rather than, because with a smartphone and a question, you can get yourself into real bother.
Absolutely.
And that, whereas 20 years ago, you had to go and ask your social worker for your files, or you had to go and rake the streets looking for someone. But now it's that instant, so it's an issue. And
I know for social media myself, I found my one of my sisters on Facebook. Well, I'd actually created a Facebook account because I thought I knew I'm talking to adopters about Facebook. I need to know how it works.
Yeah.
So I knew my eldest sister's name, and put it into Facebook. And lo and behold, up popped her profile, and it was a picture of her sitting with my birth mother. And that completely knocked me off my stool for 3 days. I did not know what to do.
I can imagine that was
And
but that's how easy it is, isn't it?
And I'm a robust adult. Well, I think I am. I could be deluding myself, but with a really good support network.
Yeah.
And I couldn't function for 3 days. And in the end, I decided, because my birth mother had told me she told her children and they didn't want to know me. So I got this narrative in my head about it. And in the end, I just wrote to her as if she knew me, and she's in Australia, the other side of the world. And this message comes back within 12 hours. And I was thinking perhaps she never even goes on Facebook, going, oh, my God, I had no idea you existed. So my mother had lied.
Oh, crikey.
It just picked a whole can of worms, but it was just the most unbelievable thing. And I thought, well, I know how Facebook works now.
Yes, well, that's that one ticked off the list, isn't it? Got the T-shirt there.
Here was I just, and now the understanding I have about, I just like something like that happening that was then out of my control. And I never gave it a second thought typing a name into the search box. And then all of a sudden, like, there's a picture of her staring at me, and it's like looking at myself in a mirror, because she just dyes her hair blonde, mine's gone grey, and there's my mother sitting next to her.
Yeah.
As a profile picture.
That's just a fantastic story in a terrifying way, isn't it? It's just... So your next training was much more visceral.
Yes, it was.
Let me tell you a funny story.
Oh, yeah, there's along the way.
Blimey. That's terrible, but great.
I think I understand this.
Yeah.
A little bit.
A developed understanding, I would say. That is a fantastic story. I really wish I could keep going, but I'm aware that we're at 1:06 now, and I've got to get Scott's got to put his intro on.
Has he?
Well, we listen to this, and it was great. But I think he'd probably go, we listen to this and I'm freaked out. Which is what I'm going to say to him. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and I really appreciate you giving your time.
Thanks for having me, Al.
And no doubt we'll be back in touch with you so you can finally speak to the infamous Scott.
I'd love to do that.
Excellent.
I sure, great excitement. I'll wait for that. Wait for the invitation.
Excellent. Well, it shall be forthcoming. So look after yourself, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Al. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.